Hey everyone, how's it going? This is Dan here for Prompt Hub, and we have a super cool new prompt engineering method to go over today called generated knowledge prompting. And what's interesting is, so this paper came out a while ago. In AI years, it's almost like 2 decades old, but it's just from 2022. And there's been a bunch of other like remixes of this type of prompting. I believe this is like the first version of it. So generally, generated knowledge prompting is an engineering method that uses a prompt to first tell the model to generate some useful knowledge, information related to the task or question at hand. And then there's a second prompt that basically pastes in that knowledge and then asks the actual question. And so it's a two-step process. You could kind of push it into one, but they have it separated as two. And so, for example, customer asks a question about rebooking a flight from New York to London. A first prompt is sent about just looking at current travel restrictions in the UK, blah, blah, blah. And then you take that output, inject in as the knowledge, and then have the user query here. So it's taking the output from the second prompt, adding it in here. It's relevant to what the question is being asked, and then having the asked question. And so, again, this is like what that flow looks like. There's a question, it generates some knowledge based on that question, plugs in that knowledge, integrates it, and brings the question as well. And then you get an answer. And so it's very similar to something we talked about before, which is analogical prompting. As you can see, we have a template for this that you can access. But basically, analogical prompting says, here's the problem, here are the instructions. First, like identify some core concepts, recall 3 problems. For each problem, describe and explain the solution, then solve the initial problem. So these kind of tutorial and relevant problem steps are the knowledge part. And so you can do it one step. There's been other remixes of it as well. And so the benefits are generally higher accuracy. That's what this study found, and it has been replicated across the analogical prompting study and others. This additional context is a really lightweight way to give the model to retrieve, information without having to set up any complex pipelines. Makes it really adaptive, so you can kind of go to very specific parts of the model's knowledge by letting it generate this information first. It could even seem like it can get to a layer deeper of understanding since it's already done that cursory search of like blanket information, that it can go kind of to a second layer, which I think has really interesting implications. And so, like I mentioned, there's a lot of different ways you could generate this knowledge. Here's how they did it, where basically they would send some examples and say, hey, here's the input, and then here's the knowledge generated input, and then the LLM would kind of fill in the blank here with the given knowledge. So we will still look at the results, even though they're quite old. Basically, they tested the generated knowledge prompting against a couple of different baselines. So no knowledge, random sentences, which had basically they would sample random, like not related sentences, and inject them into the prompt. Contextual sentences would have like proper context, but not being like actual knowledge. Template knowledge, which used templates to extract knowledge statements from the models. Retrieval knowledge was getting stuff from sources like Google or Wikipedia, and then answers, which directly prompt the model to generate answers, kind of similar to analogical prompting in that way, using a single answer to assess a few shot performance. And not super important if that doesn't make complete sense. We'll just take a look at the results here. So we're obviously seeing a lot, ours being the generated knowledge prompting. We see, a lot of bolds across the board, which is typical from a paper here. So, outperforms baseline by a fair amount. Outperforms few-shot prompting on most. And I think, interestingly, it outperformed the retrieval-based prompting on a few of the sets, but not all of them. And so it also shows that, the model has a lot of information in there. And I think extracting it is something that you could turn to before looking to do retrieval-based stuff, just because that adds like an additional layer of complexity, an additional step where things can get messed up. And so I think that's like an interesting takeaway from this that's probably still true to today, especially if you think if the models are getting better, then you would think it'll be better. That this like the difference between this would actually grow versus get smaller. And I think the last thing to note here is obviously on a couple of these data sets, specifically on this QASC data set, the retrieval-based method outperformed the generated knowledge by a fair amount. Something to note here is that the retrieved knowledge for this source wasn't just like Google or Wikipedia, like a generic source. It was a kind of like gold standard knowledge base that was specifically designed to construct this data set. So it was hyper relevant is like the key takeaway. And so having hyper relevant retrieval based systems is great. And I think if you want to try that out, that's really worth testing. Having more loosely like retrieval based pipelines is not, I don't think, going to make a huge difference. And I think that's something that is probably still true to today. And there's like an additional study at the end in terms of how much knowledge is needed. And this graph looks very similar to the graphs shown if you look at like how many examples in few shot prompting increase performance, where there's a big jump up. And then here we basically plateau from 1 to 50. And it's similar for the few shot prompting, except it's plateau right away. Plateaus around like maybe 4 to 6. And so I think it's something to kind of take note of as well. But yeah, we hope this helps. We have templates and prompt up to try this out for free. So feel free to go check it out there. And yeah, happy prompting.